are recording another podcast. This podcast is with Dr. Gill Waugh, the Dean of Faculty of Professional Studies at the University of Bolton. Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. I've had a busy but a good day. So, yeah, I'm absolutely fine, thank you.
That's really good to hear. It's always good to hear that people have had good days.
Absolutely.
So we're here to talk about your educational journey and where you are today and how you have got there. So what I want to ask you first is about your education. So how was education for you going way back when to when you went to school?
Back when. Thanks. Yeah, okay, way back when. Okay. So
assumption that it wasn't within the last few years. And that's probably down to
no, it's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. I am joking. So I'm going to take my educational journey back to actually when I went to secondary school. I'm a local girl, local woman. I was actually born in Bolton. I've lived in lots of places, but I've come back to Bolton more than once. And I went to Rivington and Blackwood Grammar School. It was a grammar school at the time. And I was in a school year that, as I went into a GCSE option year, the school actually went comprehensive and merged with the local secondary school. Now, I'm a fan of comprehensive education. I wasn't a fan of what happened to us and the impact that it had on my cohort of students. I'm still friends with people from school, and it was not a positive experience for us, and I think impacted on us all for a significant period of time, because we were literally lifted out of what was fairly protected grammar school environment, and we were moved to what was the secondary school building. We were the only year that this happened to, so we were moved into the secondary school buildings, and all of the students were just mixed up. There was no streaming. We didn't stick together in our groups that we had in our old school. And what we actually did was a lot of the work that we did was repeated work that we'd done the previous year. When you're 13, that's great. It's amazing. You just copy your homework from last year and you write the same things that you've written the year before. But has a massive impact on moving forward and choice and where you go, because it starts at that point, I think. So I think a number of us at the time didn't actually realise the impact that would have on our futures. And it did.
Thinking about this then, that would have been year 9, third year?
That would have been year 9. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you'd had 2 years as a grammar school. And
2 years as a grammar school. And then what happened was that years 10, 11 and 12 stayed in the grammar school. Year 9 was moved into the secondary school, and years 7 and 8 were in the buildings that they were already in. So it created a lot of problems, and there was a lot of student competition, pupil competition. There was quite a lot of it just wasn't a great experience for many people. And I think it took us a long time. I spoke to a friend recently who was very, very bright, but left school when she was 16. And what she said to me was, well, actually, it took me until I was 40 to realise the impact of what had happened at school. So I think, it wasn't damaging as such, but I think it kind of, we all got a little bit lost along the way somehow. So that was a really significant impact, I think, on my education. I stayed at school. I did A-levels. I didn't do remarkably well at A-levels. I did okay. And I went off to Manchester to do a first degree in catering management.
Why did you choose that area?
Always been very interested in hospitality. Thought at that point, I suppose quite naively, that the hotel industry was actually quite glamorous. So I quite enjoyed sort of the concept of working and managing in hospitality. So I went off, I did 3 years, and I did a range of different placements within that. And then when I left, you'll like this one, because when I left with my degree in catering, I was advised by one of my lecturers that the best role for me to take on board was to become an air hostess.
Really?
So this is a number of years ago, please remember. So historically, so that was the advice and guidance that I received after completing. So it's not to denigrate that role at all, but that was the proposal from the person who was my personal tutor. So what I did do was I took a decision, and again, I'm not sure how much advice and guidance I got around this, but because salaries were much better in hospital catering, I applied for a role as a national trainee with the NHS, and I was appointed as a national trainee for Liverpool. So that was my first 12 months of employment. I went off to Liverpool and to Tunbridge Wells, because I had a training centre in Tunbridge Wells. Had lots of fun, I have to say, in Tunbridge Wells. And worked as a trainee, worked in a number. I worked at Broad Green Hospital, I worked at Sefton General, and at the Children's Hospital. But I'm talking about, when was that? 81, probably 82. So a significant number of years ago. So I did my 12 months of training. I then was offered, sorry, go on.
What was it of you to do what?
To be a catering manager.
Within the NHS?
Within the NHS. So it was training. So it was training on budgets and staff management and marketing and how to recruit staff and HR. Actually, on reflection, really interesting, because of course I did the equivalent of a business management course, but it was in catering. And then I moved into a management role. So I moved from that, into I became the assistant catering manager in a hospital in Liverpool. And I did that for about 18 months. And then I applied for a catering manager role at what was Atherley Hospital, so locally really. And I went back to that, so came back really closer to home as catering manager. At the time was the youngest catering manager appointed in the NHS.
Wow.
So I have to say, I'm not sure that I really knew what I was doing. As in, I was dealing with a lot of people who were much, much older than me in either catering assistants, working in the kitchens, working in the staff canteens, staff refectories. So it was a really, really good learning curve on reflection. But it was very, very challenging at the time. And I was trying to introduce new working methods because, of course, I'd done a course and I knew all about how to do this and change this, and went in with lots of new ideas. And, we're not going to do that like this anymore. We're going to do this. Working with people who were very, very set in their ways and very set in the way that they'd always operated. So in the kitchen, there would be catering assistants using mops to clean the floor when they'd got all this shiny equipment for cleaning, and they were frightened of it. frightened of the equipment. So it was kind of, well, if you're frightened of the equipment, we'll put some training in, and I'll do the training, and I'll be able to use the equipment. So yeah, I think it was really, really good training for me.
How are you managing the dynamics? Because I'm hearing you're a young whippersnapper, and then there's these older, probably more guys. Young female whippersnapper, older guys not listening to what you're saying.
A lot of more, because the kind of staff that you would get in that kind of hospital environment would be very much women who were working in catering who had returned to work after the children had grown up or the children were in school. I had some very challenging moments with some of the cooks and the chefs, because particularly when I was first appointed as catering manager, because the main chef had applied for the manager's job and not got it. So there were some very challenging moments in those roles. But I can't say I didn't enjoy it. I really quite enjoyed the roles and enjoyed what I was doing. And while I was doing that, I also did a teacher training program. So I studied teach.
Why did you decide to do that?
Because I was kind of working out a kind of, well, I can do this, but perhaps I could do some teaching as well. And maybe that's something I could move into at some point. So I did a teaching certificate, and just as I came to the end of that, I got married. And within 3 months of getting married, my husband came home and said, how do you fancy going to live in Brunei? I'm not sure that had an awful lot of choice in the matter, because that was where his company wanted him to go. So I got married in September, and by the 1st of January, I was living in Brunei. So I don't know if you know where Brunei is.
I'm about my brain right now. No, I don't.
Right. So Brunei is a very small state on the island of Borneo.
Right.
Muslim country, very, very governed by the Sultan of Brunei. Totally alien environment for me. Didn't receive any sort of support or any guidance from the company that he was working for. Literally turned up and it's hot, so I'll walk around in my shorts, but actually that wasn't the best thing to do. So literally very naive and very green, I think, regarding that. But of course, I've been used to being very, very busy. So I got there and I was a dependent at that point. So I immediately started looking for work. It took me about 4 months to find some employment supporting teaching in a college in Brunei. And just as I was appointed, the company said, we'd like you to move to Singapore. So off we went to Singapore. So we moved to Singapore, and again, I had to start looking at what I wanted to do. I'd been there a very short period of time, and somebody said to me, I'm looking for English teachers for this agency. Will you come and work for us? I've been there about 3 or 4 weeks. And I said, I can't teach English. Oh, you can speak English. You can have a go. You'll be fine. So I started working with an agency in Singapore, and I was a private tutor for a number of adults and children. And then I decided that I would do another degree. So while I was in Singapore, I did a degree in language and literacy.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. You did that in Singapore?
I did that. I did it with Open University, but I did it in Singapore. So I took my exams in Singapore as well.
How does that compare to your first degree, the learning aspect of it? Not obviously you're in a different country, but the learning.
It was very, very different. And remember, in those days, I got my first computer when I started my degree in Singapore. So until then, no internet, no mobile phones. It does make me sound very elderly, I know, but there wasn't anything. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have. So yeah, it was very, very interesting. I'm quite an independent person, so I actually really enjoyed studying around the times that I wanted to study. But I did carry on working, but I wasn't working full time. I did my first year exams when my eldest son was 6 weeks old. And I did my finals when my youngest son was 4 weeks old. And the night before, I sat up revising with my youngest son in a rocker, rocking him while I was studying before I did my exam on the Saturday. So it was, I don't know, I never really thought it was very hard. I thought it was just life. It was just life, and it was just what I needed to do. So I kind of developed from there, and I did quite a lot. I did some work with Alitalia. So I was working with their air crew. So there was a loop there. I did get back to air crew. So their air crew used to fly in Singapore on a Friday, and I would do teaching sessions for them Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then they'd had their rest period and they flew out again. So, and then I worked for the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank with a number of Japanese businessmen who needed to improve their English with a Bolton accent, of course. So I did that for a couple of years, and I worked with Japanese families, a lot of Japanese people in Singapore, and then a number of school children that I worked with as well. But I learned a lot myself along the way.
How long were you in Singapore?
7 years.
7 years?
Yeah.
Both your children were born there?
Yeah, so my boys were both born in Singapore. And again, it was just like, oh, well, that's fine. But yeah, very much on my own with my boys when they were little. But I just kind of got on with it. Came back to England after 7 years. And then obviously, again, started to try and find work. So I started working. When I came back, I'd done a lot of what would be considered to be English as a foreign language, I suppose. And a lot of the provision in Bolton at that point, a lot of the funding was ESOL funded. And I remember going along for an interview and them being very, very positive about what I'd done. And then they gave me feedback and said, well, you've not got the job because you've not got any experience in the UK. And it's like, I've done all this work. So why isn't that? And they said, no, we need somebody who's got ESOL experience in the UK. So I then decided I would do an ESOL certificate. And I went off to Bolton College to do that. And rather interestingly, I've still got somebody who works in my team. He's semi-retired now, and he's a part-time tutor. He still does some observations for us, but he taught me on that teaching course. So I've known him for probably about 30 years, 25 years at least. So I did that. And then the woman who ran the ESOL provision at Bolton College, as I came to the end of the course, she offered me part-time work.
As an ESOL trainer? As
an ESOL tutor. So I started at Bolton College and was working part-time. Remember, I'd still had quite young children at this point, under 6. One was in school, one wasn't. So I started working part-time. I then was offered some work with what was then the Training and Enterprise Council. So I did some English teaching in what was Swan Lane Mill, because Courtauls were making staff redundant. And what they wanted was, they were mainly Gujarati speakers, and they wanted language training for those staff. so that they could then move on and gain employment. So I was spending 2 days a week supporting them. That was amazing. I absolutely loved that job. It was fantastic. I used to go into the mill and I had total control and but really, really very great students, really great people to work with.
What was it that made it so great? What did you love?
I think just the response from the students. I have to say ESOL and EFL students are usually very, very responsive and very they form bonds. I suppose that it's different from some of the more straightforward core academic programs. So I did that, and then I got some part-time work at Bury Lifelong Learning. So I took on that work as well. So at one point I was teaching 27 hours a week in 3 different places.
With 2 young boys?
With 2 children. But again, I suppose in some ways you kind of don't get involved in I wasn't involved in lots of meetings. I went in and I did my teaching. But I loved it. It was so busy, but I loved every minute of it. And then what happened after that? I was then offered I think I was offered a full-time role at Bury College. I applied for an ESOL role at Bury College, and I took on a 0.8 role rather than a full-time role so that I could pick my children up from school. So by then I think I'd worked for everybody in Bolton and Bury. So I took on that role. And I did that role. I actually ended up coordinating very quickly. I became the coordinator for ESOL and the coordinator manager of the ESOL and the EFL provision, so both kinds of language provision. And at that point, when I started that, I decided I was going to do a master's degree in education. So I did my master's in education at Bolton Institute before I had any contact with Bolton at all. And so I was at Chadwick Street with Andy Graham actually interviewed me for my course.
Wow.
A long time. So he's been around for quite a long time, hasn't he, at the university? So Andy and colleagues interviewed me. And then what happened after that? So I did my master's in education. I also did some very part-time work for Bolton Institute. And I forget about this sometimes because I think it was in 2007, 8. That doesn't sound right. No, must have been, take it back 10 years, 7. So it would have been 17, 18. I came to the University of Bolton full-time in 2003. So it would have been 97, 98. I did some part-time work at the university. And that involved teaching doctors.
Sorry, is that when you were doing your master's?
I was doing my master's and I was doing some part-time teaching at the university and at Bolton College and a little bit at Bury and a number of roles. So the role that I took on at Bolton was to teach. That they'd got a contract to support language development for doctors who were overseas doctors. They come to England and they had to take what was called the PLAB test. So it's the language test that is required for doctors to do before they can formally practice. So I was tasked with supporting 2 doctors to help get them through their PLAB test. So that was part of that. Then,
how did you find doing your master's in the middle of all this?
don't know, you just kind of get on with it, don't you? It's kind of, I think when you're used to having, I was used to getting on planes with a child under one arm and another child in my hand, and suitcases and pushchairs, and doing that on my own 3 or 4 times a year. I was one of life's organisers. So when my sons now talk about getting on a plane with a child, and it's like, what are you talking about? It was easy. I'm sure it wasn't always easy, but I don't remember the hard bits about it. So yeah, I think it was just about being super organised and about being, I've just always worked really hard. I think that's all. I've just always worked really hard. Doesn't mean I don't play out. I do play out, but I have always worked really hard. So in 98, I applied for a job at Accrington and Rossendale College. And that was it was the international education manager for overseas students. And I started that. That was a really interesting role as well, because I started in June 98, and I had one student from Russia, and I'd been there 2 days, and the principal said to me, Gill, we want you to go to China to teach on a summer school with this link at Xi'an Railway College. So we want you to go for 5 weeks towards the middle of July. Is that possible? And I said, yeah, okay, I'll try that one. And then it was the same time, I was actually in the process of a divorce at the time. So it was fine in that I had somebody who then had to look after the children, of course. So I went out to Xi'an with a colleague from a college on the Wirral, and we went out to teach teachers sort of English language communication skills, rather than the traditional read it from a book dictation sort of approach that was being used. So we did lots of games and activities. And again, a really, really great experience. So that was the start of my role in Accrington and Rossendale. And part of that role then was to recruit international students from Russia and from China. So made lots of links. The principal was recruiting students, and we had steady sort of, I would say, between 30 and 40 students throughout the time that I was there, either from Russia, China, some from Iran, some from Iraq, some European students. But we did have, and again, amazing. I loved my teaching that I was doing with the international students. And I'm still in touch with a lot of them now. I'm in touch with some of my Russian students. I've got one of the students who came over to do a course before she started her A-levels, and she's an artificial intelligence manager for one of the big accountancy companies in London. So I've kept in touch with people, not a lot, but some people that I taught. And in fact, one of them very recently, who came to Accrington as a very young woman, a young student, 16, 17, I actually went to her wedding, and she's now a qualified teacher and is working full-time at Accrington and Rossendale College teaching English. So it is great when you see that kind of that development, that she's moved on, she's done a degree, improved her language, moved on, done a degree in English, done teacher training, and is now working full-time in education. So stuff like that makes it all really, really worthwhile. So I stayed at Accrington and Rossendale for 4 years, and I was everything. When I look back on this now, I find it quite amusing, really, because My boys could do historical tours around York, Chester, a range of museums, because they came on every single trip that I did. I used to drive the minibus and take these students. So I used to pick them up at the airport. I used to teach them. I used to make sure they've got the right accommodation. So I was that all-inclusive international student experience and teacher person. So I did all of that. Thankfully, it wasn't with a huge group. And I did have, eventually, we recruited somebody to do some of the teaching. But yeah, so that was my role for that 4-year period. And then I, in 2003, never thought about working in a university, never thought about teacher training. But there was a development with what was then the LSIS, Learning Skills and Improvement Service. And there was a whole agenda of improving literacy and numeracy nationally. And there was a lot of funding went into that. And I actually got very involved while I was working at Appington. I got involved in the consultation process regarding ESOL and literacy delivery. And then a lot of funding for ESOL and literacy programs then went into teacher training. So they needed people to teach literacy, ESOL and maths. And it was literally by chance that I looked at something in the university. Didn't really think I had a lot of chance of getting the role, but applied for this role to teach. And Andy Graham interviewed me. I hope Andy doesn't mind me mentioning his name, but Andy Graham interviewed me. And I always remember Andy saying to me, so we're interviewing for this role. It's an academic role. It's a teaching role. How do you feel about leaving your management role behind? Without, I think, probably a full understanding of what my management role meant, was that actually I just did everything. And my response to him was, well, actually, I just want to teach. I just want to go into a teaching role. That's what I want to do. Anyway, so I was appointed as a senior lecturer into teaching ESOL at that point, not the literacy programs. I was very much involved in the ESOL program delivery, and joined a team where it was very, very big at that point. We had over, probably in the first year, probably 200 CPD students. We had around probably about 130, 140 full-time training teachers on these specialist pathways. It's reduced significantly over the years because the demand and the uptake for CPD, we trained everybody, we trained the in-service teachers. So that has really, really fallen back, but it does still exist in the university that we do that. So then what happened next? So I came in as a senior lecturer just to teach. Sounds like a good plan. I think I'd been in the organisation about 6 weeks and I ended up as programme leader. So I then started to manage the ESOL and literacy programmes on campus. So we had on-campus provision and then we had off-campus provision with our partners. So I started to work with the on-campus provision as a program leader, program manager. And there were a number of changes, and eventually I started to work with both on-campus and off-campus. And then I should have done a timeline of this, really. Then I moved into the head of education role, where I looked after the whole of education. Andy moved out of his role for a promotion, and I started to work on the overall head of education role. And I did that for probably about 3 years before I was asked to take on education and psychology. So that was a significant shift for me, because I've been so used to postgraduate 1-year courses, not a lot of undergraduate provision, to large scale psychology programs that needed quite a lot of work doing at them at the time. I don't think anybody would deny that. The numbers had fallen significantly. So we did a whole review of what we were doing, looked at the staffing base, looked at the recruitment, looked at specialist programs, and then we end up with what we've got today, which is a very, very strong psychology program. So we really moved that on. So I was for a while academic group leader, because that was the title under the structure. Then I became head of education and psychology. And then we had a restructure, and actually there was a little bit of a change in between. There was a role that was Dean of Student Experience, and I applied for a Dean of Student Experience role and was appointed into that role. But then very quickly, I never actually got into the role, as in there was a restructure announced, and there was an operational dean role, which probably suited my skills better than, so I moved very swiftly back into the dean role, and that's where I've been now for the last 3 years. So alongside that, I just need to tell you what else I did, because I did my master's in education. And then when I was appointed at the university in 2003, I decided, well, okay, if I'm teaching on these programs, they were subject specialist awards, and I'd not got that subject specialism. So I'm going to do that. So I did that CPD diploma, 60 credit diploma, to qualify myself as a literacy tutor. I'd got an ESOL qualification, so I did that. And then I did a postgraduate diploma in supporting international students and in TEFL. And then I converted that into a full master's in applied linguistics. So I did a second master's degree in applied linguistics. I did that through Open University, and that worked really well for me, because I'd done some sort of class-based on-campus stuff first. So I was quite happy to go back to that. So I did that. And then I have to say that probably without the support and the guidance and probably the structure that was implemented by the Vice Chancellor about 6 years ago, about all staff having PhDs, I'd never really thought about doing a PhD, because going back to your imposter syndrome, who am I to do a PhD? Oh, come on. And it became a requirement that for our roles that we should have a PhD. So I started with an educational doctorate that so it's probably more than 5 years ago. It's probably 6. It took me 4.5 years, and I think it's 3 years since I completed my doctorate. So I then did a doctorate following that. So so that's where I'm up to professionally. I'm involved, I suppose. I manage the faculty with the help of academic operations leads. I have some great teams working with me, some really strong colleagues. And I've spent quite a lot of time trying to develop colleagues and help to support them to move into additional roles with additional responsibility. Cross university, I'm involved in a number of things. So I've been, over the last few years, I've been on the Board of Governors for the university. I am still on the Board of Governors for Bolton College. I chair the Board of Trustees for the Student Union. I'm involved, obviously, in Senate, of course, because we're all involved in Senate. But I've been involved in a number of initiatives over the years. So at the moment, I'm involved in the International Student Experience Working Group, because we're trying to support and develop our international students. I'm involved in the Student Experience Working Group. I'm involved in what other developments are we doing at the moment? Oh, so the overall learning and teaching strategy. I've been working with Julian on that. But there's lots of other things that have happened in between that I've worked on with and alongside other deans and heads. I do quite a lot of work around fitness to practice. So I chair panels and fitness to practice, and I do some of the perhaps more, I'm not saying that colleagues are not capable of doing this at all. I do some of the more complex validations. So, for example, I did a validation last week that involved the College of Paramedics and the healthcare professionals to validate a university course. So I chaired that event because they can be quite demanding in their requirements. So I get involved in things like that. I think I need a rest and a drink.
All I keep thinking about is, when do you find time for Gill? What do you do? You've got 2 degrees, 2 masters, a PhD, a sprinkling of other qualifications, about 20 different schools and faculties, and
not quite 20. No. I was asked this question very recently by the Vice Chancellor himself. I'm busy. I work hard. I don't always get everything right. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I've got it all under control. I work hard. I prioritize. My focus is always on students and staff, and I think lots of students across the university would support that. And processes, of course, are important, and the rules and regulations are important. But in some ways, if a piece of paper or report goes today or first thing tomorrow morning, so if I send it at 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, it doesn't actually make a lot of difference in my world. But a student who's distressed, I need to deal with there and then. So I always would, it's the same when I'm on leave. I filter emails, and if it's a student that needs support or assistance, I would always answer those messages. I do work long hours, but I still do lots of things. I have a family. I've got a house to look after. But and I have a social life, and I like traveling. So, and when I can, I do all of those things. So I think it's just, I never, ever, I don't understand the concept of being bored. So I never, ever sit and think I've got nothing to do, because I've always got something that I can do. I tend to be, I would say, quite calm about things. When people, I don't think I'm ever stressed about my work. I'm busy sometimes, but I think I kind of, I work on I have to do this. This has to be prioritized. I need to work on this. I need to work on this. And that's my approach to work. And I also am a very firm believer in, I can only do so much. So I can do so much, but I can't do everything. And I know that I can't always do everything in my job exactly to the timescales that are required. But I do my damnedest, I would say, to try and get things done. So yeah, I think it's just about planning and I I've said this before to a number of people, I don't actually lose sleep over work. A number of years ago, I would have done. But now I don't lose sleep over work unless it involves if a student's if there's a student in crisis, or if there's a member of staff who's very distressed, that would trouble me. But otherwise, it's kind of right, well, I can deal with this, and I can do this, this, and this to help sort this out. And that's kind of my approach.
Where do you think this comes from, this sort of work ethic? Where do you think you get that from?
My parents. Yeah, I think my mum, and I think I probably didn't realise it when my mum was alive, how much impact I don't think I ever realised how much impact my parents had on what I did, because my parents were very, very much working class. My dad, I suppose, was probably in the classification of blue collar retail. He was a footwear manager. My mum worked in retail. She worked in a pharmacist, but they were very much from working class roots, working class family. And I think I was very much brought up to be they taught me to do everything. I could fix my car, I could fix a lawnmower, I could cook, I could climb up on the roof and help my dad fix the garage roof, because that's what they did. So everything that they did, and I had two brothers, but I was always involved in what they did. And I don't think you always realise that when you're a child and when you're growing up, the impact of that. And also, I think, but the impact, I'll just turn the volume up a bit, sorry. So yeah, I think I don't think you realise when you're growing up the total impact that your parents have on your overall approach to work. I quite often talk about, and I think you might be aware, I did some work with Chaturika. I've always been interested in resilience and grit, and I think the terms are being bandied around quite a lot now. But when we first started to look at that whole idea of resilience and character, and I always likened myself when I was a child, a very young child at the age of 2. I've got pictures of me in the garden with a blow-up Yogi Bear, and it was one of those blow-up things. When I was a child, it was huge, but it was a blow-up with it was a blow-up, and it had sand in the bottom. So as you punched it, it went and then bounced back at you. And I think that's very much part of my character, because it's kind of, okay, you've hit me with that. Right, how do we respond? Okay, what do we do? And I think part of it is my upbringing, my parents. I think part of it is that very young age management with a group of people that were very, very difficult and very challenging for a young person to manage, a young person who was actually probably very, very green, I have to say, because I knew everything. I thought I did. And then that whole resilience factor that was built through going to live in a foreign country, bringing up my kids more or less on my own. My husband was very involved in his work, and studying, and that built, I think, further resilience and capability. So I think there's a lot of grounding as I've worked through different roles, really. And I've been very fortunate. I've dealt with some challenging work, but I've always been very fortunate in the work that I've done. I suppose I never thought I would be Dean of Faculty in a university. I am delighted to be in that role. I'm delighted to work with amazing students and amazing colleagues, because that's what I feel we have at the university. And I never, ever get out of bed and think, I don't want to go to work. I've never had a single day where I don't want to go to work, because I've always got something to do. There's never something. There are days that you think, oh, this is going to be hard going today. But I've never, ever had that approach to certainly to my work in the university. I don't think I had it before that. So I've always really enjoyed doing what I'm doing. So there is some Jill me time sometimes. But yeah, I keep I'm always busy.
It's interesting thinking back to how you started this conversation, where you said about your high school and how you had a big transition in third year, year 9. And you said that you've only realised now how it had such a big impact on you. So what was that? Looking back now, what was the impact?
It probably built my resilience, to be honest with you. I think the impact was that I kind of became just a little bit carefree about my academic qualifications. I actually did a range of GCEs, it would have been, and what was called a 16 plus qualification, where they were being trialed at the time, and you could take one exam and they would give you what was a CSE grade and then also a GCE grade as well. And I think I probably took my foot off the pedal quite a lot when I was a teenager. And I think probably the same with my A-levels. I don't think that I took my studies as seriously as I perhaps should have. And it's really interesting, because when I talk about this, and I'll talk about this to my sons, who both had a very, very stable school environment once we came back from Singapore. But I felt very much, I changed primary school 3 times because my parents moved. So I didn't have that settled primary school. And then I had this interruption in my secondary education. And I think I probably would have done something very different, because I think I would have had better grades at A-level and probably would have moved on to do something quite different, rather than getting averagey grades at A-levels and doing what I did. I don't regret that, because I wouldn't have had the career and done what I've done. But I do think it would have been different if I'd had that consistency of education certainly through my secondary years. Yeah, I mean, that's a personal opinion, isn't it? But I do think it was I think I had 12 months where I was carefree and happy, because life was quite straightforward and quite easy. And then it impacts as you move on, because it impacts on your choices and it impacts on what you do next. I'm of the era where I actually did an A-level in domestic science, the home and society, because the girls could do domestic science, the home and society, and the boys did technology and stuff. So I am very, very good at ironing shirts, because I was taught to iron a shirt at school. For that might have been at GCSE level, but I was taught how to iron a shirt, and we had a classroom and we had a bed in it, and I feel like I'm about 130 at this point when I talk about this. I was taught how to make a bed.
I think, to be honest, they are life skills that our children should be learning now.
But they should all do it, not just
skills. Exactly.
So I was taught in the days before we had fitted sheets. I was taught how to do hospital corners on beds. But ironing a shirt, yeah, I was taught to iron a shirt at school, and it seems really odd now when you think about it. So how much we've moved away from that. Yeah, so yeah, an interesting sort of route, but I didn't set out with the idea that I want to be a manager in higher education. That's certainly not where I came from at all.
Is there anything along your pathway that not that you wanted to do, because you've obviously wanted to do, but thinking of yourself back in your secondary school, thinking when I grow up, I want to be, is there anything that you've got there? Does that make sense?
What I wanted to do?
Yeah,
I wanted to be a doctor, but I don't like blood. So in my head, when I was a child and when I was growing up, but again, when I was a child at school, I did physics, chemistry, and biology, GCSEs, and I was the only girl in a physics class, and I was the only girl in a chemistry class.
wow.
And because of that, I've actually got school reports that say things like, Gillian seems happy to be bemused in physics. And that was because they all laughed at me, because it was a class of boys. So I was kind of the class, kind of the person that everybody would laugh at because I was a girl in a class that they considered. So we've moved a very long way from that, thankfully. But yeah, very interesting. So yeah, I think a long time ago that might have been in my head, but at that point, it was very much the boys that were encouraged to go into medicine. And if you went into medicine as a girl, you went in as a nurse.
Yeah. Well, you are a doctor now, so you've achieved that.
Absolutely. But yeah, really interesting. And I kind of look now, when I look at the range of things that you can do and the range of roles, and I think there's some really exciting roles and really exciting courses. So things like the forensic psychology, I think, yeah, an amazing, I'd like to do something because I like unpicking things and working them out. So forensics, for me, forensic psychology, would be nothing to do with accountancy or anything like that. That is not what I've ever wanted to do. But I think anything that you're working with people, always of great interest, really. I think if I'd gone back in time and had a slightly different experience at school, I probably would have gone into primary school teaching rather than doing what I'm doing, because primary school teaching, I've always enjoyed working with young people and seeing that spark of inspiration in a young child and what it is, how they develop. So I've always found that fascinating. But then, of course, I moved into adult education, which has its own challenges, but its own massive range of, so, you know, we work with students from 14, 15 to 85 from different academic backgrounds, from different language backgrounds, different ages, different experiences. So that whole mix for me of adult education is fascinating. So I think I probably would have gone into primary school teaching if it had been an option at that point. But I probably wouldn't have found it challenging enough. I enjoy that wider scope, really. So
is there anything that you think, when you look back, advice-wise, what would you have given to yourself all those years ago? I keep saying all those years, don't I? I need to stop that.
It's because I said it. It's fine. It's fine. It is a long time ago. I can't believe how quickly time has gone, actually. It's unbelievable when you look back on your career and the things that you've done. Any advice that I would give to myself? I think probably, and you commented on the whole imposter syndrome, and I think it would have been very much about my own levels of confidence when I was younger, because I did lots of things, but I'm not sure I was ever truly, particularly when I moved into education, And I think particularly when I moved into HE, because I can remember standing at the front of the lecture theatre and looking at everybody I knew exactly what I was going to do and what I was going to say, and standing there and thinking, what are you all looking at me for? And it's kind of, and that actually, I went from teaching very small groups to this group of 130. I think very much about advice I would give to myself. I think you can have a plan, but you have to take opportunity. I think that's really, really important. I think you can grow your own opportunities, I think, by commitment and have to say by working hard, you can grow your own opportunities. I think you have to keep, and it's something that I've always worked on a principle, but I would, if I moved back in time, you have to look at where things are going. You can't look at where it is now. You have to look at what is available. And so where are things going in employment? What is happening here? What is happening with funding? Where's the funding coming from? And then you need to work towards being qualified. And I think the other thing advice I would give myself is that rounded education and experience is so, so valuable. So every experience that you have is valuable. If it's a negative experience, it's something you don't like in employment, then never let it happen to somebody else. I think is really important. I think it's the advice I would have given to myself was to sort of embrace the opportunities and think about the opportunity. Because I think what I've done, I've moved through the opportunities, but when I was younger, I don't think I ever thought about that as actually, this could be an opportunity for me to do this, to move here. I don't think even in my younger academic days, that I actually thought about what I was going to do with what I was doing next. I think I took opportunity, but without thinking through. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I kind of I think one of the things I was thinking about this morning, and I think one of the things that is really important for certainly for if you're working in senior levels or higher levels of education, is that you have to be very, very flexible, and you have to be very, I suppose, in some ways, quite clear about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. I think that having academic knowledge is not the only thing that makes you, in fact, it's probably not the thing that makes you a good manager. Understanding people, being interested in people is really, really key to any role where you are working with teams and working with students. So the whole thing about emotional intelligence and being involved and engaged with students and staff is so, so important in the roles that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important to understand. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to do these podcasts, is to talk about people, who they are. Because I know when I came to uni, that was exactly my thoughts. You look at these academics and you're just in awe of them. I could never imagine being one. I could never imagine talking to one. I remember knocking on I'll say it was Dr. Michelle Law's door to ask her a question. I completely lost it. I ended up saying no or something, and then I had to leave and come back again because I just couldn't get my words out, because I was looking at her as this amazing sort of different person. And I think by speaking to people, you realise what is important and what their journeys actually have been and how they've got. You're a real person.
I think perhaps I didn't kind of fully answer the previous question, really, because I think what is really important to notice, there isn't a normal route into what we do. There is not a normal route. There isn't. We do have, I suppose, there is still some academic routes in. So where people have gone to school, done a degree, perhaps done a teaching qualification, moved into the university, but they're not the norm. Most people have a very different route, in different experience, have worked in different places, and I think there isn't a great advantage to or a great disadvantage that folk that follow an academic route in. There's a place for that route, but there's also a place for people who are changing careers, who are returners to employment. There's a whole range of things that you can get involved in at different levels. So my view is very much, if I look at my original team of colleagues who perhaps work in education, I know very well. I've known the team very well for a number of years, and I've worked very closely with them. But they're all different. And the reasons that they came into education, they're all different. And that route through is all very different. So, there is no such thing as a normal route into the roles that we do.
No, there isn't. I think you've made that very clear today. It's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to press stop on the recording. Just give me 1 second.